Now, a West Bloomfield resident started a podcast called Classic Conversations during the COVID pandemic to indulge in his love for pop culture, TV, movies, and nostalgia altogether. And despite his podcast being a side project initially, it's gained significant popularity and placing it in the top 1.5% of all listened to podcasts. We got to explain this. We got to talk to him. As a matter of fact, joining me right here live on The Splash is the host of Classic Conversations. We have Jeff Dwoskin joining us. Thank you so much for being here, Jeff.
Hey, how are you? Great to be here.
Doing just fine. I see it looks like you have a nice setup. Is this your podcast setup that we're looking at right now?
It is. It is my
Love
podcast
that.
setup. Yeah.
Love that. So if you're watching on CivicCenterTV.com, you can see his lovely setup right there. But let's get straight into it. What inspired you to dive into the wonderful world of podcasting during the pandemic?
I always wanted to do podcasting. I originally was really into social media. Well, I still am. And I was going to start a social media-based podcast in 2017 called Viral Intentions. And I kind of just sat on it for a long time. I was really into Twitter at the time and, just Viral Intentions, kind of like Cruel Intentions, the movie. I thought it was, a good play on words. And I just sat on it. And then come March 2020, the pandemic hits and we all are home with some extra time in our hands. And I'm like, oh, I have time finally to do my podcast and realize I can't start a podcast called Viral Intentions in the middle of a pandemic. And so
Good one.
I mean, that's not even a joke. It is literally what happened. And I had everything. And so I had to change it. It was originally called The Jeff Dwoskin Show and involved the Classic Conversations as I kind of understood what I was, where I was going with this. And so, but it was always interviews and talking to famous people. I've always loved going to Comic-Cons, the Motor City Comic-Con every year, meeting the celebrities. You can see they by tens on my wall if you're watching. And that's what I did. I loved it. So when I'm like, wait, they'll talk to me?
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I can do this. I can do this.
You never know who will respond to you if you just reach out on social media, be like, hey, I'm starting a podcast or I'm doing a podcast. I would love to have you. And then next thing you know, hey, I'm down. I'll do it. Nowadays we can just do it from Zoom or do it remotely. It makes things so much easier. Everyone can be a professional interviewer, podcaster, but it makes a difference when you're consistent and you're growing and doing the things like you're doing to become in the top 1.5% of all listened to podcasts. I want to get into your lineup of guests, right? It reads like a tribute to classic television. What draws you to these particular stars and shows?
It's a lot of it's people that I grew up watching and, people from the Brady Bunch, Cousin Oliver and, Peter and Cindy and the Love Boat, Isaac, Gopher and Doc, Happy Days, Ralph Malv and Potsy and Mrs. Cunningham. So these are people I grew up watching. And so to be able to spend time with them and just talk to them about their careers and how they got to where they got to, it's just fascinating. And it's sort of a little dream come true. So it's, once they started saying yes, I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. All right, we got something here. So, yeah.
No, you definitely, what I want to highlight is the fact that you definitely tapped into a market. For you to find that lane and then consistently do what you do to put out that content and then grow into the position that you're in, that says a lot. You're in the top 1.5% of listened to podcasts, a remarkable feat. What do you think resonated so strongly with your audience for you to grow to where you are now?
I think if you're in the right demographic and you see these folks, you want to hear them. And I focus the conversations on conversations that I'd want to hear. They're literally conversations. Like I try to make it sound like I've known these folks and we're talking, we've known each other forever.
Right.
Even though that's not the case. And, I put a lot of time into those conversations. And I think the end result of my conversations with these folks, even if they talk to other folks, I usually get something unique in the collaboration. And this particular interview is special.
Yeah. That's kind of my approach too when I think about it, Jeff. I like to talk to strangers like I knew them, like we just got done talking like 5 minutes ago. Let's just pick up from right here. And I've never met you a day in my life. I think that builds organic chemistry between people sometimes. You'd be surprised how that goes. But with us right here live on the Splash, host of the Classic Conversations podcast, Jeff Dwoskin, talking about his success and consistency of creating a podcast in a very saturated market, by the way. With that being said, I know you have a background in comedy. We've already kind of went over that. And also digital media. Just talk about how these two skills/tools have also helped your podcast and platform stand out.
Absolutely. Well, I think being a stand-up comic for 20 years helps me kind of engage and chat and removes a little bit of the fear of talking to somebody, and I can kind of tap into places maybe that other people might not or might not feel comfortable, but I can do it in a way just because I'm used to kind of engaging with people in that particular way and kind of you know uh, connecting on that level.
Right.
Digital marketing, it just helps that I just kind of understand the landscape. I think you have to be really good at social these days to kind of get the word out and promote yourself. It's a lot of self-promotion.
Yeah, and you have to use those tools. That alone can kind of show you or kind of help you stand out. That can make you show up in algorithms. I'll say mastering the digital media side, the SEO side. But how can you keep their attention? You can capture their attention by popping up in the algorithms, but can you keep their attention? Can you keep them engaged? Can you keep them wanting to know what you're doing next in that type of sense? So with that being said, how do you kind of line up or come to the idea of what you're going to feature in the next episode, who you're going to interview, and things of that nature?
Well, a lot of it sometimes is, you reach out to 10 people. Sometimes 5 say yes, and sometimes 1 says yes, and sometimes none say yes. So, you go to the next group. My focus is always, which is what I tell anyone, it's like, you can't beat the algorithms. They're going to change underneath you. Just focus on doing good content and good things. And everything kind of works out in the end. So that's my focus, is just sort of, doing what I want to do. I do record ahead of, a lot ahead of time. Like I'm not recording today and it releases next Monday type of thing.
Okay.
One thing that's different from my podcast than others, a lot of times they're talking about books, but those books are about their life. So it works perfect for the format that I have. But I'm not like a promotion thing. I'm not like, oh, hey, all right, well, your new show is on Amazon tomorrow and blah, blah. It's not like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to then, because I have such a backlog of interviews recorded, I can kind of pace it out, and famous person, person you haven't heard of, but is just as interesting. A lot of the interviews that I do that people may not even understand who they are, because they weren't Penny on Lost in Space, or they weren't, Cagney from Cagney and Lazy. They were Joe Alves, the guy that created the shark in Jaws and made all that visual work. And every visual element, if you're familiar with the movie Close Encounters of the Third Time that you can think of, this guy, Joe Alves, is responsible for. And so like that interview in itself is amazing. It's one of those kind of gems. And there's a lot of those type of gems where you're like, I don't know who this person is, but it's likely their stories are very robust, very amazing. And they're kind of the behind the scenes of the things that you do know about.
I love that perspective. Every now and then you'll stumble across an interview on YouTube. It'll be somebody, I was the executive or assistant production manager or director of such and such movie, but then they have so many stories or different angles or never before heard of stories. You be like, wow, I never knew that. So I love that you're bringing that to that, because those are gems, like you said, those hidden stories that you're bringing to the world and to the digital media in general. So keep doing that good work right there. I love that. I'm an advocate for it. Real quick, any guests, dream guest that you want to have that you have not yet had?
I would love to have Henry Winkler on my show. That's sort of like my dream guest.
Yeah.
Seth MacFarlane, Steven Spielberg, those would all be great.
Okay. Names I'm familiar with. I like that. Yeah. Hey, good luck. We hopefully you'll get those. Last question. You mentioned bringing a bit of Michigan into your episodes whenever you can. Can you just talk about the role that Michigan or your Michigan background plays in shaping the podcast, if it does at all?
Yeah, a lot of times when I'm reading someone's memoir or something like Dean Butler, he was Almanzo on Little House on the Prairie. So he was the one that married Melissa Gilbert's character. If you need to paint it a little more on that. So I'm reading his thing and it's just, he starts talking about Frankenmuth, Michigan in his memoir. And so we ended up having a conversation about that because I like to dive into that because it's like no one else is really going to ask him about that. Right. So we ended up talking about Bronner's because he was a huge Christmas fan. So we ended up talking about Bronner's, that Christmas Wonderland. And then, I introduced him, but if for some reason he hadn't had the fried chicken, so it was like he didn't go to either. I'm like, which one did you go to? And he's like, yeah, I didn't. I'm like, what? He's like, but he was really into the fudge, So it's like, yeah. So it's like if you can bring, and a lot of times they come through Michigan a lot. You know what I mean? Like that, it's been a part of their journey as well, just because Michigan is such a hot spot for entertainment or performing. So it's likely that at some point they've been here.
Yes, yes. Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for bringing some laughs, some perspectives to us, and your podcast. Once again, just tell people how they can watch and or listen to your podcast on any platform, please.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a podcast listener, you can go to anyone, type in Classic Conversations. If you also add in my name, Jeff Dwoskin, it probably comes up a little easier. Classic, jeffisfunny.com is my website. You can hit that up. That's the easiest thing to remember probably. And then you can link to any podcast from there, any player from there as well. So, yeah.
Oh, man. Thank you so much again, man. I'm pretty sure a lot of people who aspire to do podcasts can get a lot of gems out of this information, out of this interview. Once again, host of Classic Conversations podcast, Jeff Dwoskin. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.